The moment Gianna Caldwell looked at my daughter Zara and said those words out loud, "She can't fly first class, she looks homeless," something inside me went very, very quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from shock, the kind that comes from decision. I've lived long enough in the world of old money and older secrets to know that the loudest people in any room are almost always the most afraid. But Gianna Caldwell wasn't afraid yet. She would be. Let me back up because you need to understand what led us to Gate 14 at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International on a Tuesday morning in October, wearing clothes that cost more than most people's car payments, while a gate attendant named Britta, her lanyard said Britta, customer experience, looked at my 16-year-old daughter like she was something tracked in on the bottom of a heel. Zara had been crying since we left the parking deck, not because of the flight, because of what happened the week before. What happened the week before is the part of this story that nobody in our zip code was supposed to know about, except someone already did. We lived in Buckhead, the kind of Buckhead neighborhood where the HOA newsletters come on cream-colored cardstock and everyone knows everyone else's business but pretends they don't. My husband, Thaddeus Ase, built his real estate development firm from the ground up over 22 years, and in Atlanta, his name meant something, meant access, meant the right table at our nets without a reservation, meant that when Zara got waitlisted at Spence in New York, one phone call unwaitlisted her. That was the world I had married into, shaped myself around, poured 11 years of my life into like concrete into a mold. What I didn't know, what I had been carefully, surgically kept from knowing, was that Thaddeus had been quietly restructuring the firm's finances for 14 months, moving assets, reclassifying properties, and funneling a very significant portion of our family's net worth into an account in the name of a woman named Petra Solano, who was listed in his phone as PT Contractor. I found out the way women in my position usually find out. Accidentally. I was looking for the insurance card for Zara's orthodontist. I found a wire transfer confirmation for $412,000 instead. $412,000 to a contractor who had no company, no LLC, no business address, just a condo in Midtown and a name my husband whispered in his sleep. I did not scream. I did not throw anything. I closed the drawer, poured myself 2 fingers of the Pappy Van Winkle that Thaddeus kept on the wet bar for guests, and I sat in our living room in the dark for 3 hours, thinking. When you grow up the way I grew up, mixed girl from Decatur, scholarship student at Westminster, always the one who had to outperform everyone just to be taken seriously, you learn that rage is a luxury you cannot afford. Strategy, though, strategy is free, and I am very, very good at it. The trip was supposed to be a girls' weekend, me and Zara flying to New York, shopping on Fifth Avenue, seeing a show, and staying at the Baccarat. I'd booked it 2 months earlier as a birthday gift. I kept the reservations. What I changed was everything else, quietly. Over the course of 6 days, I made 7 phone calls, 14 emails, and had one in-person conversation with a woman named Rochelle Tate, who had been Thaddeus's business attorney before she was mine. The switch in loyalty, I suspected, had been coming for a while. Rochelle had a way of looking at Thaddeus in meetings that told me she'd seen something she didn't like. Here's what nobody at that gate knew. I wasn't fleeing. I was repositioning. So there we were, Zara in her totem coat and her new Stan Smiths, her natural hair pulled back in a puff, looking exactly like what she was, the 16-year-old daughter of a woman with a combined household income that would make Gianna Caldwell's eyes water. And Gianna Caldwell, who I recognized because she sat on the Buckhead Alliance board with my husband, who had a face like she was permanently tasting something off, who was standing near the first-class boarding lane in a fur-trimmed jacket that was doing a lot of work, Gianna Caldwell looked at my daughter and said it, out loud, to a stranger beside her. She can't fly first class, she looks homeless. The gate attendant, Britta, heard it, didn't flinch, nodded, started to walk towards us. Zara looked at me. Her eyes were already filling. She's strong, my daughter, tough in all the ways I raised her to be, but she's still 16, and there are some things that cut through toughness like a blade through silk.
Someone looking at you and deciding you don't belong, especially in front of your mother, is one of those things. I put my hand on her shoulder, squeezed once, a signal she knew. It meant, don't react yet, Mama's working. And then the man in the navy suit walked over, and everything changed, but not in the way any of them expected. His name was Conrad Beaumont. I knew exactly who he was before he opened his mouth, because I had called him 48 hours earlier. Conrad was a senior partner at Beaumont and Aldridge, one of the oldest white shoe law firms in Atlanta, and he handled, among other things, the kind of corporate litigation that kept very powerful people very protected. He was also Thaddeus's former fraternity brother. Was, past tense. The falling out between them had happened 3 years ago over a development deal in Cobb County that went sideways in ways that Thaddeus had tried to make Conrad disappear from. Conrad had not forgotten. Conrad had, in fact, been waiting. He walked up in that navy suit, Thomas Pink, I clocked it immediately, and he flashed not a credit card, but a credentials card, Federal Bar Association card, gold edge. He looked at Britta, the gate attendant, and then at Gianna Caldwell, and he said, with the calm of a man who had won more arguments in courtrooms than most people have had difficult conversations, "She's with me. They both are, and I'd advise everyone within earshot to be very careful about what they say next, because one of you just made a statement that qualifies as discriminatory denial of service, and I have 3 witnesses and a phone with a very good microphone." He wasn't bluffing. He had been recording. Gianna Caldwell's face went the color of old oatmeal. But the story doesn't end there. The story was just beginning. Because what Conrad slid into my hand as we walked down the jetway wasn't a business card, it was a folded piece of paper, and what was written on it made my blood go absolutely cold. On that paper was a single address, not Petra Solano's condo in Midtown, something else. A storage facility in East Point, Unit 114, and underneath the address, in Conrad's careful attorney handwriting, "Thaddeus keeps everything, including what he has on you." I read it twice, then I folded it and put it in the inside pocket of my jacket, right next to my heart, where I could feel it with every breath. Zara was already settling into 2A, pulling out her earpods, the tears drying on her face. She had no idea. I needed it to keep it that way for exactly 48 more hours. The flight to LaGuardia was 2 hours and 11 minutes. I spent the first 40 minutes staring out the window at the clouds, running numbers in my head. Not financial numbers, risk numbers. What Thaddeus knew, what he might do when he realized I'd been moving. Because I had been moving. In the 6 days before this flight, I had transferred a portion of our joint household account, the portion that was legally mine under the post-nuptial agreement we'd signed in 2019, the one Thaddeus had pushed for and then apparently forgotten about, into a separate account. I had also placed a call to my original attorney, not Rochelle, a woman named Simone Vance, who worked out of a quiet office in Decatur and who had once described herself to me as the person you call when you need to stop being someone's footnote. Simone had been waiting for my call for years. Thaddeus thought he was the chess player in our marriage. He had no idea I had been studying the board since year 2. In year 2, I found the first lie. Small, almost forgettable, a dinner he said was a client dinner that was in fact a poker night with people I'd never heard of. I filed it away. In year 4, the business trips to Houston that always seemed to align with a woman named Candace, who was eventually quietly transferred to the Dallas office, filed. In year 6, the password he changed on his laptop without telling me, the new gym membership for a gym 20 minutes farther from our house than the one we both went to, the cologne that wasn't his cologne that I smelled on his collar exactly once, all filed.
I am very good at filing things away. I learned it from my grandmother, who raised 4 children alone in South Atlanta after my grandfather left, and never once let any of them see her cry. She used to say, "Baby, the woman who falls apart first loses." I have never fallen apart first in my life. Zara fell asleep somewhere over the Carolinas. I watched her face soft and unguarded the way it only gets when she's asleep, the little scar above her eyebrow from a bike accident at 8, the way her lashes fan out on her cheekbone. My daughter. The one real thing in 11 years of curated, carefully maintained, quietly suffocating performance. If Thaddeus thought I was going to let him dismantle our lives so he could fund Petra Solano's lifestyle and disappear into a restructured corporation, if he thought I was going to go quietly, then he had fundamentally mistaken who he married. He married a girl from Decatur who got into Westminster on a full scholarship and outperformed every legacy kid in that building. He should have remembered that before he started moving money. We landed at LaGuardia at 12:47 p.m. The car I'd arranged, not the car Thaddeus thought I'd arranged, a different car, booked under my maiden name, Elodie Marsh, was waiting on the arrivals level. Zara was already texting her friends, the airport incident mostly metabolized the way teenagers metabolize everything, quickly and incompletely. I helped her with her bag and I smiled and I was present and warm because she needed me to be, and also because the performance of normalcy is its own kind of armor. Inside, I was already 3 moves ahead. The storage unit in East Point, what Conrad Beaumont said it contained, and what I was going to do with it. The Baccarat Hotel on West 53rd was everything it always is, hushed and crystalline, the lobby glittering with geometric light, the kind of place where no one looks at you twice regardless of what you're wearing, because money, real money, is self-evident and doesn't need to explain itself. We checked in. Zara immediately commandeered the bathtub and the Nespresso machine. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my laptop and sent 2 emails. The first was to Simone Vance. 3 words, proceed as discussed. The second was to a woman I had never met in person, but had been communicating with for 11 days, a forensic financial analyst named Dr. Ife Bankole, who had been referred to me by Rochelle Tate, and who specialized in exactly the kind of corporate asset restructuring my husband had been quietly conducting. Dr. Bankole had, in those 11 days, found something even I hadn't anticipated, something that changed the entire nature of what Thaddeus had done, something that meant this wasn't just a divorce, this was a federal matter, and Thaddeus Osei, builder of skylines and collector of silk pocket squares, had no idea the walls were already closing in. That night, Zara and I had dinner at Les Bernardins. She had the lobster, I had the scallops. We talked about her college list, about the novel she was writing, about a boy in her AP history class named Theo, who she described as annoyingly smart in a way that's actually kind of impressive. I laughed genuinely for the first time in weeks. She didn't know that her mother was in the middle of the most consequential week of their lives. She didn't know that 3 people in Atlanta were currently working on her behalf, that a storage unit in East Point held documents that would reframe everything, that a gate attendant named Britta and a woman in a fur-trimmed jacket named Gianna Caldwell had inadvertently given me, by their small cruelty, an audience and a timestamp for a recording that Conrad Beaumont's phone had captured perfectly. I didn't know yet what was on those documents in Unit 114, but I knew Thaddeus, knew how he thought, knew that he kept things, receipts, records, insurance against everyone in his orbit, because he had learned early that information was currency, and he never spent it all at once. I had counted on that. The man who keeps records of everyone else's vulnerabilities tends to keep equally meticulous records of his own. You just have to know where he hides the box. What I didn't count on, what I could not have predicted, was that Unit 114 didn't just contain financial records. It contained something about Gianna Caldwell, something that connected her to Thaddeus in a way that reframed not just my marriage, but the entire social world I had been living inside. And when I found out what it was, the revenge I had been planning quietly, legally, with precision, it got so much better. My phone buzzed at 11:42 p.m. while Zara slept. It was Conrad. 2 words. Call me. I went to the bathroom and turned on the fan and sat on the edge of the tub and called him. He answered on the first ring. His voice, which was always measured, always calibrated, had something in it I hadn't heard before, something between urgency and satisfaction. He said, "Elodie, I need you to brace yourself, because what's in that storage unit isn't just about money. Your husband and Gianna Caldwell have been business partners for 3 years, silent partners in a shell company called Solano Bridge Holdings, LLC.
I was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then I said, "And what does Solano Bridge Holdings LLC do?" Conrad paused. "That," he said, "is exactly the question that's going to end them both." The woman at the gate thought she was looking at someone who didn't belong. She had no idea she was looking at the person who was about to burn everything down, legally, deliberately, and with a smile. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the darkness of the Baccarat Hotel with the city humming 43 floors below me, and I ran every scenario I could think of, the way I used to run practice debates in my head before Westminster tournaments. Thaddeus and Gianna Caldwell, business partners, a shell company named after his girlfriend, or what I'd assumed was his girlfriend, because if Petra Solano was in the company name, then maybe Petra Solano wasn't a girlfriend. Maybe Petra Solano was something else entirely, something more complicated, something worse. At 6 a.m., I ordered room service, eggs, coffee, a fruit plate for Zara. I sat at the window table and watched the city wake up, and I called Dr. Ife Bankole in Atlanta, who picked up before the second ring because she is a woman who understands that when the client calls early, the client has already been up for hours thinking. I told her what Conrad told me. She was quiet in that particular way that financial analysts are quiet when they're processing information they've already partially suspected. Then she said, "Elodie, I need you to hear me carefully. Solano Bridge Holdings has received at minimum 6 wires from Caldwell Capital Group in the last 18 months. What I couldn't figure out was why Gianna Caldwell was sending money to what looked like a real estate front. Now it makes sense. She wasn't a client, she was a co-investor." A co-investor? In a company named after the woman my husband was supposedly having an affair with. Either Thaddeus was the most brazen man alive, or Petra Solano was not what I thought she was. Zara woke up at 9 and we spent the morning exactly as planned. The Met, a ridiculous amount of time in the Egyptian wing because she's been obsessed with ancient history since 7th grade, lunch at the Café Sabarsky, a walk through the park. I was present. I held her hand when she grabbed mine walking across the grass. I laughed at her commentary on the tourists. I am capable of being 2 things at once. I learned this the hard way over 11 years of being Thaddeus Osai's wife in rooms where nobody said what they actually meant. You learn to have an entire interior life that nobody around you can see. By 2 in the afternoon, Conrad had gotten access to Unit 114. A mutual contact, I won't say more than that, had provided authorization. Conrad sent me photographs, 12 of them. I sat in the hotel bathroom again with the fan running, and I opened them one by one. Financial statements, partnership agreements, property records, a deed to a property in Savannah I had never heard of, email printouts, and at the bottom of the stack, something I had not expected, a photograph, printed, not digital, of Thaddeus and Gianna Caldwell and a third person, a man I had never seen before, standing in what looked like a construction site, all 3 of them shaking hands, all 3 of them grinning like they had just gotten away with something. On the back of the photograph, in Thaddeus's handwriting, Day 1, nobody knows but us. Day 1, nobody knows but us, except now somebody did, and that somebody had just forwarded 12 photographs to a forensic financial analyst and a federal bar attorney who had a very, very interesting morning ahead of them. I called Simone Vance at 3 p.m. from a bench in Central Park while Zara was in a bookshop on the corner. Simone is not a woman who wastes words. She said, "The preliminary filing is ready. I'm waiting on your go-ahead. Once I file, it goes public within 72 hours. Thaddeus will know the same day." I asked her one question: is Zara protected? Simone said, "Every asset with her name on it is ring-fenced. Education trust, custodial account, the college fund, the car, all protected." Then I said, "Go." Zara came out of the bookshop carrying a tote bag full of novels and looking like the best version of a teenager possible. Happy, curious, entirely unaware that her mother had just set a very controlled, very legal fire that would, within 3 days, reduce her father's empire to a carefully documented ruin. I held out my hand for the bag. She gave it to me. We walked back toward the hotel, and she said, "Mom, are you okay? You've seemed a little distracted." I looked at her. My daughter, the reason for all of it. I said, I'm better than okay, baby. I'm exactly where I need to be. She didn't know what I meant, but she would. Not today and not tomorrow, but she would understand eventually that her mother had spent 11 years watching and waiting and learning, and that when the moment came, she did not hesitate. Here is what Solano Bridge Holdings LLC actually was. Ife Bunkoli, with Conrad's legal muscle behind her, had the full picture by Thursday morning. The company was a construction bid rigging scheme. Thaddeus's firm, Caldwell Capital Group, Gianna's company, and a third entity controlled by the man in the photograph, a developer named Stanton Pruitt, had been coordinating to inflate bids on 4 publicly funded development projects in the Atlanta metro area. Municipal contracts, tax dollars. They'd been doing it for 3 years, rotating which company submitted the winning bid, splitting the inflated difference through Solano Bridge. Petra Solano was not a girlfriend. She was a bookkeeper, a former employee of Thaddeus's firm who had been brought in to manage the shell company's accounts. The wire transfers to PT Contractor were payment for her silence and her management of the accounts. She had been, from what Ife found, an increasingly nervous participant. She had kept copies of everything. Petra Solano, the woman's name I had whispered in the dark like an accusation, had been keeping receipts for 2 years. She had been trying to figure out how to get out. She just hadn't found the right person to talk to yet, until I had her phone number from a contact of Conrad's, and I called her myself. The call lasted 41 minutes. I will not share everything that was said, because some of it was between 2 women who had been used and managed by the same man, and that conversation belongs to us. What I will say is that Petra Solano had copies of every transaction, every email, every internal communication from the scheme stored on a drive in a safe deposit box at a Regent's Bank in College Park. She had been waiting. She had been scared. She had been, she told me with a voice that cracked only once, trying to protect herself because she knew too much and had come in too late and didn't know who to trust. I told her about Simone Vance. I told her about Ife Bunkoli. I told her that if she was willing to cooperate formally, she would be protected, and that the man who had put her in this position would not walk away from it. She was willing. 3 people in that bid rigging scheme thought they were untouchable. One of them was married to me. He forgot that being married to someone means they know how your mind works, how you file things, where you keep your secrets, that you always keep a paper trail because you trust paper more than people. He forgot that the woman he underestimated had spent 11 years learning everything he ever taught her about how power actually functions. He taught me well, too well. Zara and I flew home on Saturday, not back to Buckhead. I had arranged for us to stay temporarily with my cousin Nadine in Smyrna, who had a 4-bedroom house and the kind of warm, no-questions-asked energy that I needed to surround my daughter with for the next several weeks. Thaddeus had been served on Friday afternoon, divorce papers and a civil fraud notice simultaneously, because Simone Vance does not do things halfway. He called my phone 14 times between Friday at 4 p.m. and Saturday morning. I did not answer once. What I did do on Friday evening was forward to his cell phone, not a call, a text, the photograph from Unit 114, the one with Day 1, Nobody Knows But Us on the back. I added one line, "They do now." He did not call after that. The silence from a man like Thaddeus is its own admission. He had always talked his way through everything, charmed his way, argued his way, leveraged his way. When he went quiet, I knew he understood what was happening, and I knew he was afraid. Not of losing the marriage, not of losing the house, of losing the thing that men like him value above everything else, the appearance of legitimacy. The civil filing became public on Tuesday. By Wednesday, it was in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. By Thursday, 3 of the 4 municipal contracts had been flagged by the city attorney's office for review. Stanton Pruitt's attorney issued a statement. Gianna Caldwell's company posted a no comment on their website. The Buckhead Alliance quietly removed Thaddeus's name from their upcoming gala committee page. The world that had nodded along when Britta the gate attendant moved toward my daughter, that world was rearranging itself very quickly. I didn't celebrate. Celebrating felt like the wrong energy for what this actually was, which was grief wearing the costume of victory. 11 years. A marriage. A version of a life. Even when you choose to burn something down because it has to burn, you still feel the heat. Zara knew by now. Age appropriate, careful, honest. Your father and I are separating. Here's what I can tell you. Here's what I can't yet. Here's what will not change about your life. She cried. I held her. She asked me if I had known for a long time. I said, long enough. She asked if I was scared. I looked at my daughter, this girl I made, this person who still reaches for my hand in parks, and I said, not even a little bit. I meant it. Fear is for people who haven't planned. I had planned. 2 weeks after we returned, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Gianna Caldwell. She had somehow gotten my cell. She was not calling to apologize. I want to be clear about that, because what she said was not an apology. It was an attempt at damage control, wrapped in the language of one. She started with, Elodie, what happened at the airport, I need you to know that wasn't what it looked like. I let her finish her sentence. Then I said, Gianna, I know about Solano Bridge. I know about the Savannah property. I know about the Cobb County rebids. And in about 10 business days, the city attorney will know everything I know. So I would suggest that whatever conversation you were planning to have with me, you instead have with your lawyer. There was a silence on her end that lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she hung up. Petra Solano cooperated fully with the investigation. Her testimony, combined with Ife Bancole's financial forensics and Conrad's legal framework, built a case that the DA's office described as unusually well documented. They were not wrong. Thaddeus had documented everything because he never imagined anyone would get access to it. Stanton Pruitt took a plea deal in early December. Gianna Caldwell's company settled civilly in January, paying back a significant portion of the inflated contracts. Thaddeus fought it. Of course he did. He is a man constitutionally incapable of accepting consequences. But by March, with his assets frozen and his legal fees compounding, his attorney advised him to negotiate. He got 18 months, suspended, with restitution and community service. The AJC covered it on A7. He had wanted front page his entire career. He got A7 in a story that used the word scheme in the headline. And Britta, the gate attendant? I almost forgot about Britta. Except I didn't. I have never in my life forgotten anything. I wrote a letter, not to Britta, to the airline. Detailed, specific, time-stamped with Conrad's recording attached. I did not demand her termination. I am not in the business of taking someone's livelihood over a moment of cowardice and complicity. What I requested was that the incident be formally documented, that the airline review its first-class boarding practices and staff training for implicit bias, and that a written response be provided to me within 30 days. The airline's customer relations VP called me personally within a week. I was professional. I was clear. I told him what I wanted: accountability and improvement, not punishment. He thanked me. The call was recorded, naturally. I believe in documentation. By April, Zara and I had moved into a townhome in Virginia Highland that I bought in my name with my money, using the proceeds from the postnuptial agreement that Thaddeus had once pressed me to sign because he thought it protected him. He had not read it carefully enough. He had not anticipated that I would. The townhome has a back porch with a garden that Nadine helped me plant. Tomatoes, herbs, 2 rose bushes because my grandmother always had rose bushes. Zara has the top floor, her own bathroom, a reading nook I had built into the wall under the window. She started a new school in the fall. She is, by every measure I have access to, okay. More than okay. Thriving, actually. Kids are more resilient than we give them credit for, especially when they're not managing their parents' emotions on top of their own. The thing about building a life on your own terms after spending 11 years building one on someone else's, it's terrifying. It's also the best thing I've ever done. Second best. The first best was Zara. Not even close. I ran into Gianna Caldwell once more, in October, almost exactly a year after the airport, at a fundraiser for a literacy nonprofit. I serve on their board now. It's one of the things I do with the time I used to spend maintaining appearances at events I didn't care about. Gianna came in late, in a different coat this time, something chastened about the way she moved through the room. She saw me across the space. I know she saw me because she changed direction, spent the entire evening on the opposite side of the room, left early. Someone next to me, a woman I'd just met, a pediatric surgeon named Dr. Renata Flores, whispered, "Is that Gianna Caldwell? I heard she's in serious trouble with the city." I said, "I wouldn't know." Renata looked at me sideways. She was smart. She knew I knew. She also knew I wasn't going to say more, and she respected it. We had wine together and talked about her work for the next hour, and I felt, for the first time in a very long time, entirely myself. I've been asked, by Rochelle and Simone, and even by Nadine once, late at night over a bottle of red wine on my back porch, whether I feel bad about how it all went down, whether I feel any guilt. And I always tell the truth. I feel sad. Sad about the version of the marriage I believed in for the first few years before I started filing things away. Sad that Zara has to navigate a father who is diminished in her eyes through no fault of her own. Sad that I gave the best years of my professional prime to maintaining a life that was, at its foundation, a performance. But guilty? No. Guilt requires that you did something wrong. I found the truth, protected my daughter, and pursued legal accountability for a fraud that hurt the city I grew up in. If anything, I waited too long. My grandmother used to say, "The woman who falls apart first loses." She never said anything about the woman who wins. I think she assumed we'd know what winning felt like. She was right. Here is what I know now that I did not know when I boarded that flight to New York with my daughter in October. I know that the cruelty of strangers is almost never actually about you. It is about what you represent to them, what they need you to be, what their own fear requires them to project. Gianna Caldwell looked at Zara and saw something she needed to diminish because somewhere in her own carefully constructed world, she was already diminished. The gate attendant nodded because nodding along is always easier than standing up. And standing up requires a kind of courage that isn't in everyone's budget. Conrad Beaumont stepped in not because he is a hero, he is a man with his own motivations and his own history, but because the moment aligned with his interests, and sometimes that's how justice finds its footing, imperfectly, opportunistically, but real. I stepped in for my daughter in the only way I know how, not loudly, not in the moment, not with a scene that would have made me feel better for 30 seconds and accomplished nothing lasting. I stepped in over 12 months with documents and calls and carefully chosen allies and a post-nuptial agreement and a forensic accountant and a storage unit in East Point and the recording on a federal attorney's phone. I stepped in the way my grandmother would have recognized, the way women from Decatur who got into Westminster on scholarship and outperformed every legacy kid in the building know how to step in. Quietly. Completely. And with receipts. Zora read about her father's case in her AP government class, in a lesson about municipal corruption. She came home and sat down across from me at the kitchen table and looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "You knew all of this was happening, didn't you?" I said, "Yes." She said, "And you handled it?" Not a question. I said, "Yes." She was quiet. Then she said, "Teach me." And I said, "That's what I've been doing your whole life, baby." I pour my coffee in the mornings on the back porch now, watch the garden come in, think about what I want the next chapter to look like, not what it needs to look like, not what it's supposed to look like, what I actually want. I'm 41 years old and I am in the clearest-headed, most grounded, most fully myself state I have ever been in. That isn't bravado, it's just true. There is something that happens to a woman when she stops managing other people's comfort at the expense of her own clarity. Something opens up, space for the things she actually cares about, space to remember who she was before she started performing. The Buckhead house sold in February. Thaddeus got his portion and I got mine, per the agreement, and I did not look at the sale listing because the house had not been mine in any meaningful way for years. It had been a stage set, expensive and immaculate, and stage sets don't belong to the actors. Simone handled the paperwork. Conrad sent a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle, 23-year, the good one, with a note that said, "You never needed me. You just needed a witness." You was right on both counts. I poured a glass on the back porch the night after the sale closed, thought about my grandmother, thought about Zara upstairs in her reading nook, thought about the women who don't get out, who don't have a Rochelle or a Simone or an Ivy, who don't find the storage unit, who don't know about the post-nuptial clause. I thought about them for a long time. Then I finished my drink, went inside, and started writing this down, because if it helps even one woman trust her own filing system, trust what she's been noticing, trust what she's been quietly documenting, trust that she is not imagining it, then every word is worth it. Zara got into her first choice college in March, full merit scholarship. She didn't need it financially, but she wanted it, wanted to know she'd earned it herself, not on her parents' name or their checkbook. She got it. She called me from school and I could hear her crying through the phone, that particular kind of crying that's actually made of joy, and I sat down right where I was, on the floor of the kitchen, back against the cabinet, and I let myself cry too. Not for the year we'd been through, for her. For who she is and who she's going to be, for the fact that she stood in an airport at 16 and let someone make her cry and then watched her mother take that pain and do something lasting with it. She knows who she is. She knows what we're made of. She knows that when someone looks at you and decides you don't belong, the response is not a scene. The response is a plan. Executed quietly over time, with documentation, with integrity, with intelligence, and with the kind of patience that people who underestimate you never see coming. They said she couldn't fly first class. A year later, the woman who said it is negotiating a civil settlement, the man who engineered her silence is serving supervised probation, and I am on my back porch in Virginia Highland drinking good bourbon and watching my roses come in. First class was never about the seat. It was never about the seat. It was about knowing, always knowing exactly where you belong, and making sure that by the time anyone else figures it out, you're already miles ahead, at altitude, looking down.
If this story moved you, even just a little, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to defend your truth when no one else believed you? Drop a comment below. I read everyone. And if you felt something while listening, if this reminded you of your own journey, or gave you a new way to see family, please give the video a thumbs up. It helps more than you know. Share it with someone who needs to hear that blood isn't the only thing that makes a family. And if you're new here or just passing through, hit that subscribe button. I've got more stories coming, real ones, raw ones, about love, identity, motherhood, healing, and the messy, beautiful ways life surprises us. Thanks for watching, and remember, truth is never something to be ashamed of. Before you click away, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm grateful you spent these moments with me.